I don't know, the weather change and everybody's in and out with weird junk. So. Do you see it? It claims it's doing. So, all right. So we are in Romans chapter 10. We had just kind of finished verse 10 last week, thinking about why it is that Paul continues to reinforce that connection between what you believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth. And basically what Paul is getting at there is if you really actually truly believe it, you're going to talk about it. I think this is probably getting at some of what Peter's talking about when Peter says be ready to make a defense is first admitting that you have it. And if you can't say that, then certainly you can't defend it. So it's a commitment thing for Paul, that when you've committed yourself to it, you're able and willing to talk about it. So let's just go ahead and pick up and read verses 11 through 13 of chapter 10. 11 through 13. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So this is again where Paul is getting pretty radical, because we've already seen that the whole Jesus is Lord thing is like this sort of verbal rebellion, this treason against the emperor, right? Caesar is Lord was the motto of the day, not Jesus is Lord. So if you're going to confess Jesus is Lord with your mouth, whether you're Greek, whether you're Jew, it doesn't matter. You put yourself in the same category culturally, socially, and spiritually, right? Jesus is the same Lord is Lord of all, he says in verse 12. And I think it's interesting that what Paul is affirming is what we can call universal lordship, right? It is God as Lord of everybody, right? Not, the Jewish Messiah and then sort of like the second-hand effect for everybody else, which is sometimes the way that we kind of think about it. Paul actually, as we get further into Romans 11, is going to say, really it's the other way around if you use those categories, because Israel rejected the Messiah. And so by rejecting the Messiah, God then turns his attention more fully toward the Gentiles in order to make the Jews jealous so that he can then bring the full number of the Jews in as well. So it really is kind of, using, or not using, that's a bad word, but it is a plan that more heavily involves the Gentiles than these Jewish Christians might have realized. Because remember, these are the people who likely experienced the day of Pentecost and went back to Rome and took the gospel message with them when they returned. So God's riches are available to all who call on Christ. It doesn't matter what your ethnic distinction is. He's also quoting from the book of Joel and the book of Isaiah, but particularly in verses 12 and 13, he's quoting Joel chapter 2. Well, how do you know that he's quoting Joel chapter 2? Well, we could go back and look at it, but also think about what Joel's prophecy is, right? Part of it is your young men will dream dreams and your old men will have visions, and my spirit will be poured out on Jewish flesh. No, my spirit will be poured out on all flesh. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. Right? That's sort of the Pauline version of even from Genesis. Right? The intention was to bring everybody in through the work of the Messiah under the power of the Spirit. It's just the plan. And it's now been fully revealed in Christ. That's what Paul would say. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. This is, again, not an ethnic issue, not even really a choice issue. And I think this is where we kind of rub up against some stuff that'll make us a little bit uncomfortable. But notice that everyone doesn't say, for everyone will be saved with privilege given to God, who think that there's sort of a select elect over here that are God's chosen people, and therefore they've got more access than everybody else. And I also say it in terms of the Jews, who, as God's chosen people, In Romans, Paul is combating that idea that they've got more access than anybody else. It goes both ways. It's a whosoever will kind of thing. So let's go to 14 through 17. This is this is a pretty fun little section. How then, Paul says, will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of who they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So this is a logical sequence. Remember that Paul he's basically good at everything, I've decided. But he's very good at argumentation, right? He's almost been giving like an emotional appeal. I mean, it is based in knowledge, yes, but that emotional appeal of, here's the reality of the Old Testament. Moses told your mouth, right? And so Paul takes that and he says, well, you already know that, and now think about what Jesus has done for you. And my goodness, you don't worry about who's going to ascend or descend because Jesus has done it. And you don't worry about who's going to descend because Jesus has done it. And don't worry about what testimony you're going to give because you've got the gospel. If you've got Jesus, you've got the gospel. So this has been almost an emotional, yes, intellectual, mostly emotional. Well, then in verses 14 to 17, he goes to the other side. And he's going to give us this very logical sequence of gospel proclamation. In the first place he starts, his calling requires believing. Nobody believes or calls on someone they don't trust. I mean, to give you, I don't know, some example of this, maybe if my car broke down on the side of the road, if I knew that John Bonet wasn't going to come help me, why would I call her? Calling requires belief. I have to believe that she's going to show up. Now, the two of us on the side of the road might be a fun, sitcom moment, but nah. Her dad knows lots of car stuff, so my dad knows lots of car stuff, so maybe together we could piece it. But you don't call on somebody you don't trust. Then secondly, believing requires hearing. Okay, faith comes through encounter with the gospel message, the same thing, right? If I haven't heard that the gospel is trustworthy, if I haven't heard that God is trustworthy, why am I going to believe it? I'm not calling John Bonet because she ain't going to show up. And I heard that over and over again. What am I going to do? I ain't going to call her, right? Because that's going to be reputation. Okay, here comes the gospel. When we hear the gospel over and over and over again, if we're hearing it preached and taught correctly, it should reinforce our knowledge of who God is and strengthen our faith, and therefore cause us to rely and call on him more as Christians. As unbelievers, it's sort of that repetition thing. I hate to use this example, but it's kind of like the torture chamber where the water drops and it's consistent and it hits you over the head over and over again. Eventually that does something to you because it's consistent, right? It's kind of the same thing with the gospel. When you hear it over and over and over again, you've got to decide, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to trust it? Am I going to ignore it? And the way that most people think is, well, all right, where do the majority of people that I trust land on this? So there's another angle of trust. But you can't hear it unless it's preached. And this is what I think is really cool, because what God is saying through Paul here basically is people are flawed, people are messed up. But God's normal method of communication is through human messengers. And you go back and you look at the Old Testament and you see that. Think about the prophets. Think about Moses. I mean, for crying out loud, Moses was a really annoying person. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I probably would not have liked him very much because he's very, very unsure of everything that he does. He really doesn't like responsibility at all. And then when something goes a little bit sideways, he throws a fit. Like, that is who Moses is fundamentally, and yet that is the person that God set to deliver the children of Israel out of Egypt. Now, the one that we would probably all like and trust is Aaron, because Aaron's fairly consistent, he's well-spoken, he's articulate, blah, 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 and he's the one that convinces, or not convinces, but allows them to create the golden cow. Don't miss the boat just because you don't like somebody's personality. All right, that's the best point. Same thing with the prophets. I mean, Jeremiah was probably insufferable. I've got this prophecy and it's burning within me like my bones are on fire and I've got to go out here and I've got to tell it. Like, he would probably strike us in the same vein as people who yell at you on the street corner. But that was God's messenger. Because it's not about the person, it's about the message. And you have to hear the message, not the messenger. And then the last part of that sequence is preaching requires sending. Mission, whatever you want to call mission, but mission requires call and commission. You got to be sent. And what? Right? I mean, you don't have to go to Myanmar or Burma or whatever. You can go to Colombia. You can go to Taylor Road. You can go to Brother Tommy and I to Hattiesburg. I mean, but you have the gospel close at hand, close to your mouth, as Paul has already reapplied Moses. And so if you've got it there, then it's your job to proclaim it. This is some more of that confessing with your mouth. And we're all sent in that way. Now, there are some who are set aside for particular ministry. And I think Paul's also got this in view. Like, if you're not called to preach, please don't. You will mess some people up. Even people who are called to preach might mess somebody up sometimes. That's just the truth of it. Why? Because we are human. I need to put that down because I'm spilling it everywhere. We're human. That's what we do. We spill coffee, right? But Paul in this quotes right at the end, Isaiah 52:7, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Now, if you look at that in context in Isaiah, these are the messengers who are coming back announcing Israel's return from exile. But the good news of restoration of Israel to the land prefigures that greater good news of salvation in Christ. Because we're in exile to sin, right? I mean, that's the sort of the name of the game. We're in exile, we're in bondage, we're oppressed by sin. Same thing. How beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. How beautiful are those who show us there's a way out, who are consistent with their demonstration of the gospel message, who are effective because over and over again they are representing the gospel in a way that is engaging and in a way that draws people to Christ. So you start with the message, but the message has to go out. And that's what Paul is saying here. The message has got to go out, and who is it going to go out from? So he says in verse 17, I want to go back just for a second. Faith comes from hearing. Faith isn't something we generate, by the way. Faith comes from God. We can't be faithful. Paul's already told us that. None are righteous, no, not one. Well, if you can't be righteous, you can't be faithful. So faith has to come from God. But how does he produce it? Through his word. Verse 18. Have they not heard? Indeed they have, for their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. That's David. That's from Psalm 19. But Paul's taking David's words about natural revelation. The world around you, you can see that things have been created, therefore you're responsible. Well, David's talking about the same thing in Psalm 19, and now Paul's taking that and saying this is the same thing as gospel proclamation. Their voice, the voice of the messengers, has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the earth. That is what we are to do. Israel can't claim that they haven't heard the gospel message. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to be a hardliner on Israel here. Paul's doing that. I'm just reporting. This is his concern, right? Go back to the beginning of verse 10. My heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. This is about Israel for Paul. So no, you can't say that you haven't heard the gospel message, because you have. We've all been preaching it. We've all been teaching it. We've been giving it to you. You have the prophets. The prophets prefigure all of this. All you need to do is connect the dots. So then we go to verse 19, and let's read 19 through the end of the chapter. But I ask, did Israel not understand? First Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With a foolish nation I will make you angry. Then Isaiah is so bold as to say, I have been found by those who did not seek me. I have shown myself to those who did not ask for me. But of Israel, he says, all day long I have held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. So, God knew. Moses knew. Moses foresaw this was God's plan. God is going to use some other nation. If we go back to 19, those who are not a nation, right? These are the rando pagans. I'm going to use those people to provoke Israel to jealousy. And you see whispers of that in the Old Testament, right? You get a pagan convert here and there. Think about Ruth, right? Ruth does faith way better than the Jews in the Old Testament. Think about, who's another in the Old Testament? Think about Rahab. Rahab the prostitute. But Rahab, in her moment of helping the spies, exhibits more faith than most of the other people. Like, you've got little whispers of this through the Old Testament, and it's just amped up in the New Testament. God uses one group's blessing to motivate another group's seeking. And in this case, it's the Gentiles' blessing to motivate Israel's seeking. And I think that still applies. Like, I think when the unbelieving world, whether it's Jewish or not, when they see transformed Gentile lives, it should make them curious about the gospel. But the unfortunate thing is we don't live like we've got anything any different. We don't prove it. And part of that is because, I'll just be honest with you, in America, but especially down south where we live, we don't have to, is our thought process. Because this is the Bible Belt. Everybody's in church. Everybody's heard the gospel. It's been told to them over and over and over and over again. There's nothing I can do about it. You've heard it. Are you going to respond or are you not? Like, subconsciously, that's kind of our mentality because it's just in the water. I still regularly, and you can go like up north, let's say DC, you can go to DC and you won't hear this question. But around here, people still say, where do you go to church? Like, who are you, who's your people, and where do you go to church? That's your three questions. Because it's just part of it. So we don't feel this compulsion, and we don't really see the need to look different from those that are around us because, well, if Brother Tommy and Miss Charlotte are Christians and they're living like they're supposed to be, then I just need to live like them and we'll all be living like we're supposed to be. And maybe that's true, but maybe there's something they're not doing right. I mean, I don't know. I'm not calling y'all out. I'm just saying, maybe there is. And I'm following their pattern as another Christian. Well, when we start doing that, by the time it gets down to somebody who actually needs it, it's so watered down and so fake that what are we showing them? So, let's keep going, because God is persistent in his appeal. Paul says Isaiah is so bold as to say. I have been found by those who did not seek me. I have shown myself to those who did not ask for me. But of Israel, he says, how long I have held out my hands? A day and a half? No, all day. And when we read that, we need to read that as all day, every day. Those who aren't seeking God found him through his gospel. The Gentiles, who had no reason, by the way, to seek him. He hadn't revealed himself to them in any miraculous ways because Israel messed up. I mean, that was the job of Israel as the chosen nation, was to demonstrate the power of Yahweh to the rest of the world. They didn't. So when Gentiles come to faith, as Paul's talking about it here, they're coming to faith on the sheer power of the gospel, and that's it. It's not the lived experience of the Jews that they're looking at. It's not anything other than the gospel. And yet, God is sitting there, standing there, I don't know, whatever posture, with outstretched hands toward Israel. They get it. It's not as though he's got his back to the Gentiles to do this, but it's like, they get it. Hello. I mean, God's not a southerner, probably, but if he was, they're like, what are y'all doing? Come on, right? Where y'all at? Because despite Israel's disobedience, God continues his appeal. Now back up to verse 13. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So to whom does that continued appeal also apply? Everybody. Loyal to his covenant. And that patience with Israel demonstrates that. He has not given up on them. He has not sidelined them. This is not an issue of I'm putting Israel to the side while I deal with the church, and then after I get done dealing with the church, I'll rapture them out of here so I can deal with Israel. It's outstretched arms to everybody, always, all the day long. Because it's the same gospel. All right, we get to go into verse 11. Chapter 11, I didn't think we'd get that far. All right, so Romans 9 is God's elective faithfulness. Romans 10, Israel stumbling over righteousness by faith. And so now in Romans 11, you get God's future plan. This is the high point of his theological argument. This is probably the high point of the whole book, these 3 chapters, but especially chapter 11. Because now he's going to reveal the mystery of how God brings these covenant promises and purposes to completion. But there are still some questions on the table. Has God permanently rejected Israel? I mean, even as he says all day long, I have held out my hands to a disobedient, contrary people, you can read that in such a way that it's over, right? I have done this and I'm not doing it any longer. So that question is still there. Question number 2, why is Israel not responding? What's the purpose of their hardening? Third question, how do we as Gentile Christians view our relationship to Israel? Question 4, you don't have to write all these down, but question 4, what does the future hold for ethnic Israel? I mean, that's probably the big one in most of our minds. And then number 5, how do we reconcile God's sovereignty with his covenant faithfulness? Because that kind of seems to run at cross courses with each other in the sense that in God's sovereignty, he already knows who's going to respond when, where, and how. But his covenant faithfulness forces him to continue to sit there and plead with those that he knows are not going to. Right? That's not fatalistic. That's not futile on God's part. That's who he is. It's sort of like if you've got a kid, I don't know. Well, okay, we can use the oven grate as an example. You can know beyond a shadow of a doubt, as well as you know your last name, that when you open the oven up, this kid who's for some reason obsessed with the oven is fixing to reach in there and grab the grate. Like, you can know it's fixing to happen. And you can stand there and you can plead all day long, and you will. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Even though you know what's fixing to happen. right? But there's that part of you that just can't let the kid do it without the constant warning, right? And even more than the constant warning, you might even actually chastise them a little bit. I mean, you kind of take a little time. There's God, right? That's where some of the chastisement comes in. That's where, not because he's expecting a change of heart, but because he's doing his job. That's the best way I can think of it. He's doing his job. So, Paul gives us his personal testimony in verses 1 and 2. He says, I ask then, has God rejected his people, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin? God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Paul is living proof that God hasn't rejected Israel. Because if God had rejected Israel, Paul would never have been converted. Because not only is he Jewish, he's a descendant of Abraham through Jacob, but he's tribally identified. He's from Benjamin, Jacob's youngest son. Formerly opposed, right? He was a persecutor of Christians. Not even just a persecutor, but like one of the top dogs persecutors of Christians. And now, as an apostle, he's called to minister to Gentiles. But if God had rejected Israel, why would he pull Paul out of that? Why would he use him in that way? The phrase, whom he foreknew, indicates God has an eternal covenantal choice of Israel which cannot be revoked. God is faithful to his covenant. He set Israel aside as chosen people. They will be chosen people always. He can't break the covenant. He's not going to break the covenant. But then he brings us to Elijah. So I love the way that Paul does all this, by the way, because it's like if you don't know anything about the Bible and you come and you read Romans, either you got to be a really good student and go look all this stuff up, or you're going to be lost, right? Because this is about, this is showing that pastoral heart toward those Jewish non-believers. So he says, beginning in the latter half of verse 2, do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So if you go back to 1 Kings 19, which Kevin not too long ago finished preaching through, Elijah feels completely alone in his faithfulness to God. I alone am left and they seek my life. But God has this hidden remnant. He says there's 7,000 faithful Israelites. You don't know them, but I've kept 7,000. And if you go through Israel's history and you pay attention, God has always preserved a remnant. There is always a faithful remnant. But it's not about works. This faithful remnant is not about works. It's not about those who have done enough to be in the club. In verse 5, so too at the present time there is a remnant. There's also a remnant for you. But if it is by grace, verse 6, it is no longer on the basis. All right, you can't work your way into good graces. We do use that phrase a lot, though, don't we? I got to get back in so-and-so's good graces. And the implication is, I get to do something to make them happy. Like, if you want to be back in their good graces, try this. One of my students from last year, who's now the senior English teacher, Mr. Pittman, I don't know. I think Miss Sugg hates me. Well, what'd you do? Like, why do you think that? What'd you do? And they tell me. And then I did tell this particular one. Of course, she's one of those who worries about everything anyway, but I was like, well, if you want to get back in her good graces, go talk to her. Go tell her. Look, I don't know what's up, but I want to have a good experience, and can we work this out? And like, she's not unreasonable. But at that point, if that's really what it takes, and it's not doing the thing to get back in graces necessarily, but if that's the way that we approach the gospel, even for ourselves, we've missed it. I mean, yeah, you're saved because you believe, but you're missing out on a whole host of blessings by thinking that you've got to work your way into them, or you got to work your way up to them somehow. So it's a both and. God has always been faithful to his covenant by preserving a remnant, and that remnant are those who have persevered through grace and faith rather than works. Well, how do you know that? Well, go look at the Pharisees. The Pharisees can check all the boxes, but what's their motivation for doing it? Is it faithful obedience, or is it to check the boxes and to look good? So we keep going, verse 7. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that would not see and ears that would not hear, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. So yeah, this is a hard one, because what that says, much like in Exodus when Moses is writing about Pharaoh, they were hardened, right? As in something acted upon them and hardened them. So he gives us these quotations, Deuteronomy 29:4, Isaiah 29:10, Psalm 69, 22 to 23, to tell us what? That only the elect remnant within Israel obtained righteousness. There's always going to be one of those. And that God gave the rest over to spiritual blindness as judgment for their rejection. All right, now this is where it gets a little funky, because what is the order here? Is it that they had an opportunity, they rejected him, and therefore God, to use the old Baptist phrase, put him on the shelf? Is it that he already knew that they were going to reject him, and so they never had a shot anyway? Is it that the elect remnant is not, or that those that are hardened rather are those, it's both sides of the same coin, that they chose to reject God and therefore they were hardened, but it was a free choice? Like, what does this look like? As badly as I hate to say it, the only way that stands up to the rest of the Bible is God knew they were going to reject him and they never had a choice. Now, that doesn't seem to square with the whosoever will that we've just been talking about. The reason that it works is because as you go through chapter 11, that is a temporary condition. God has not consigned them to hardening and therefore damnation. They do get their opportunity. This is sort of like the recovery question. So let's look at, we're not going to get through all this, but let's look at verse 11. So I asked, did they stumble in order that they might fall? So there's the question. Were they hardened? Did they stumble so that they might be damned? Would be another way to read that. By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous. Israel's stumbling serves God's redemptive plan. We just have to understand that from what Paul is saying. It's not frustrating it serves it, because there's a ricochet effect here. Israel rejects the gospel. As a result of their rejection, the gospel goes to the Gentiles. The Gentiles hear it and respond in large numbers. when they respond in large numbers, this should provoke Israel to jealousy. So then some Israelites investigate and believe, and the cycle continues and expands. So that you constantly have, in the way that, at least in my mind, I make sense of this, is you really kind of always have a bigger circle of Gentiles than you do Israelites. But you kind of see that pattern already in terms of what Moses said. I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. So if they're not a nation, that means you've got several nations, converts from several nations, put up against one nation. Right? So there's always going to be more people. This is not, it's not a problem in that way. Then he says in verse 12, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Here's another question now. Who's fully included? Does this mean that all of Israel, that if you're Jewish at the end of the day, you're in? What does that mean? So we got a current and a future blessing. If their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, that's the current blessing. Israel's rejection brings worldwide gospel expansion. If they had accepted Christ, this is the way I think of it, if they had accepted Christ, then Christ, the message of Christ would never have gone beyond Israel. And the reason for that is, look at how they handled the law. They didn't handle it well. They became very insular. They protected it for not even the Jewish people, but the top, most righteous religious part of the Jewish people. So if they had been the only ones to keep it, it wouldn't have gone out. So that couldn't happen. But there's also a future blessing that Israel's conversion will bring even greater blessing to the world. How much more will Israel's conversion? How much more blessing will they bring? It's an enhancement. Israel's conversion enhances the gospel. It enhances the effect of the gospel. It doesn't replace the church. The church doesn't replace Israel. It's not about replacing anybody. It's about these two groups of people who have these very special but different relationships with God being brought into the same covenant family under the truth of the same gospel. Not law and grace, but grace. Grace that abounds. All right. So let's stop because I could keep going, but we will pick up in verse 13 next week. Questions, comments, irritations, frustrations, rebukes, rebuttals. All right.